This is the Janet Ray podcast with another episode of What's It Really Like? What's It Really Like kind of gives you an inside look to the life of real people, to hear their stories. What were they thinking? What were they doing? You know, how were they able to overcome, the things that they were put in? That's what's it really like. And we are coming up. This is the 25th anniversary of the bombing at April 19th, 1995. Timothy McVeigh, he parked a rented Ryder truck in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, downtown Oklahoma City. Now, inside that truck was a powerful bomb made out of fertilizer, diesel fuel, and other chemicals. And then at 9:02, the bomb exploded in front of the federal building, killing 168 people on that day. And the most iconic photo that came out from that bombing was Oklahoma City Firefighter Chris Fields carrying the body of the precious 1-year-old Baylee Almon, and seen around the world. I mean, when you see that photo, you immediately know where that's from, the moment that happened, and what's it really like to be a first responder with the Oklahoma City bombing. That's why today we are talking to that firefighter from that photo, the photo that changed his life forever. And this is Chris Fields. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Thank you for coming in and joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, where does your story begin, Chris? What was your life like before April 19th?
As far as fire department career, I was hired in 1985, and so at that time in 95, I had 10 years on at the time, and I guess I was overachiever early because I was a captain already, like with 8 years, and so I had 2 years as a captain, and I was just a junior officer at Station 5, had just come up through the ranks, and before that time we had some, serious, 3 and 4 alarm big fires, and we've had the floods, and we had, a few small tornado stuff, but nothing like what happened on April 19th.
And you were married at the time, is that right? You have kids?
Yes, I was. I still am married. I was married then. At that time in 95, I had one son, Ryan, who was, I think he just turned 2 years old in December of 94. I think he's 27 now, and then since then, I've had another son. He's 21, and he's a junior in college, and he knows everything.
Yes, they do. So tell us what that day was like. Run us through April 19th, 1995.
April 19th, 1995. I can always remember it was a Wednesday because I was at Station 5, and we all, each station you have daily things you do on daily routines. Each station kind of makes their own. And Wednesday was yard day. And so guys were out mowing and weed eating. And we had a couple of new guys at the station. We had recruits rotate through there. And I just remember giving the guy, one of the recruits, a hard time about not having breakfast ready because it was 9 o'clock. And our station officer liked to eat at 9 o'clock is what I was telling him. And we were in the kitchen, and shortly after that, we heard and felt the blast. The windows rattled. I was at Station 5, which is what
distance to the bombing?
5th to 22nd, 17 blocks north, Station 5. And we actually thought there was an old board and ice cream plant next to it that was still operating. We thought a train had derailed or something. So we went out the side door to look and didn't see anything, and we looked back to the south towards downtown Oklahoma City and saw the large plume of smoke. And there were 3 rigs at that station, an engine, a rescue ladder, and a hazardous materials unit. I was the officer on the hazardous materials unit that day. But Major Cruz, who was our station officer, he just said, let's go. So we all 3 rigs, we self-dispatched ourselves, knowing that we would, seeing the large plume of smoke and knowing where we were, figuring we'd be dispatched anyway, that we went ahead and self-dispatched and headed towards the building.
And so when you were pulling up to that site, when you could see the building, what was your thought?
Well, it was kind of the first 10 or 15 minutes, we didn't even see the building. We parked it like 5th and Broadway because there were just so many people in the streets and traffic. So we just parked the rig there and started walking towards the building. And we were told by my station officer to come to the YMCA building, which was catty corner from the Murrah building. It had a daycare in it also. And there was just a lot of walking wounded over there from shattered glass. So we kind of set up a triage there I was there probably about 10 minutes with my crew. And then the incident commander asked for Hazmat 5, our crew, to come down to the building to help the police department. So we're 10, 15 minutes into the incident before we actually see the building. And I still remember just standing there. I know we kept walking, kept doing our job, but it felt like you were just kind of in a daze staring at it with your jaw dropped. And I remember, there was still paper and debris floating down. And I remember once we got so close, we weren't even walking on the pavement. We were walking on debris and glass and all sorts of stuff. And once we got there to see that, 1/3 of the building pancaked down on top of each other. And, looking back now and over the years, as great a loss as 168 citizens were, when you saw the building, it's shocking that more weren't killed that day.
Yeah. That would be a small number compared to the thought of how many people could have possibly died.
Right. You're talking about 9 floors pancaked down, and what was, I think, over 600 injuries, and buildings damaged 6 and 7 blocks away. So is it's not to downplay it or to make light of the loss, but to see that and only 168 were killed was just amazing.
Yeah, and I think they had said like something over 600 people were injured that day.
And severe. I mean, there's people still 25 years later today still dealing with those injuries, both physical and emotional.
How long were you there before they started bringing people out of the building?
Well, when I said we got called down the building, we helped the police department get a lady that was just, she wasn't trapped by any debris. I think she was tangled up in like wire from the suspended ceiling and stuff in the basement. So we helped get her out, and then we were going to the other side of the building to make entry for another assignment, and that's when I encountered Sergeant Avery, and he was just yelling that he had a critical infant. And
he is the one who then handed Baylee over to you. What was that moment like?
It was, and I've talked to him several times, but we got together, it's like a year or so ago, and he told me, he'd never told me before, but he said I was like the third, not necessarily firefighter, but the third person that he approached saying he had a critical infant. And everybody just kept saying, well, go over here, go over there.
Yeah.
And, when he told me he had a critical infant, I didn't know he was a police officer at the time. He was just I look at the picture now and I could see he was in a police department t-shirt, had his gun, had a hat that said police department. But when I was first telling the story, I was like, this guy handed me a baby. I didn't remember. I didn't remember police hat, gun, or anything. And I just, my mom says there's a reason. I just said, here, I'll take her. And first thing I did was check Baylee for any, signs of life. She had, I used to say insulation and debris, but I like concrete dust and stuff out of her throat to try to get an airway. I didn't get any, signs of life. And she had a slight open skull fracture and stuff like that. Did
you part of you know at that time
yes,
that she had probably passed away?
Yeah, I was 99.9% sure that she was already passed. But, I looked across the street and there was an ambulance, IMSA unit. There was a paramedic out there working on people, and I just walked over to him and said, I have a critical infant. And he looked up at me, and the ambulance was full. They had a person on the floor in the ambulance. They had somebody on the cot, and then they had somebody up on the bench seat. And then there were 2 or 3 people laying around on the ground on backboards. And I remember him just saying, let me get a blanket because we're not going to put that baby on the ground. And that's when, once I found out there was a photo taken and saw the photo, I didn't know what I was doing. That's when I was waiting for him to get the blanket. And I was just
It's looking at her.
and I was looking at her, and I was just thinking, that somebody's world is getting ready to be turned upside down. And, and not knowing that was early into the day, not knowing that feeling, that scene, whatever was going to be, replayed 167 more times of people, of their world being turned upside down with the loss of a loved one.
And that you are the last person that's having that opportunity to almost to comfort, this infant.
Right. And I'll skip ahead, and I know we'll get back to it, but that was a lot of the stuff that, and when I finally met Baylee's mom, Erin, that she had told us that for me and Sergeant Avery, she could tell we were fathers, and that, by the way we were holding Baylee, and the way that she felt that Baylee was, treated, tenderly and cared for. So
I spoke to Erin, and we talked about that, and I said, the look on your face, it's just as if you were comforting Baylee, and like you could tell that was a very emotional moment,
right,
to be standing there with this infant,
right. And then the fact that I had a son at home that was just a little over a year old, so I could relate. And I say that thought was just like, wow, somebody's world, was getting ready to be turned upside down. Shortly after that, the paramedic put the blanket out. I handed Baylee to him and went and caught up with my crew. And
so you then had to carry on for the rest of the day. I mean, that was your day, right? I mean, bringing people and going through rubble, and what was the remainder of your day like? I mean, did you think about her for the rest of the day?
I did. I know at one point I did, because we were there till about 11:15 that night. And during one of after they, all part of the story, once they made us evacuate, because they thought they found another explosive device, we were sent to an R&R area, and we're just sitting there talking with the crew, and we were just talking about, the lady in the basement and this other lady that we had gotten out. And I just mentioned that, I think I said a guy still then. I said a guy handed me a baby that was already, passed away. So I think that was about the only other time that I really, talked about it. And then, like I said, we encountered, we had contact with one other person, alive that day. Then the rest of the day was spent pretty much, I'm sure there were rescues going on around the building, but for us, after that, we were pretty much in recovery mode the rest of the day.
And that's how you spent the rest of the time. So then were you then had the next day off?
Yes.
You're 24 on, 24 off. When did you see the photo?
I saw the photo, quick story. We got back station about 11:15. The chief over all the dispatch used to be a gentleman named Harvey Weathers. Harvey called me on a circuit line, and he said, "Hey, Chris, did you carry a baby out of the building today?" And I said, "No." I said, "A gentleman handed me a baby." He said, "Well, I've got a photo. It's grainy. It was faxed to me from the Associated Press. They want to try to identify the firefighter in the photo." And he said, "I've already talked to Chief Mars, fire chief at the time," and he said, "Sure, if you can, it's just public info or whatever you want to call it, but if you can identify him, go ahead." And so he said, "Well, I can tell it's a dark red helmet, and it's got a 5 on it, Chris." He goes, "It looks like you." I said, "Well, hold on." So I went and asked the other 2 officers at the station that would have had red helmets.
Okay.
And just asked them. They said, no, they didn't carry a baby out or anything like that. So I went back and told Harvey. I said, "Harvey, I guess it's me." And he said, "Well, it's you. I'm going to tell him it's you." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, what's going on?" He said, "Well, the guy from the Associated Press said that this picture is going to go worldwide." And as hung up, and everybody's like, "What was that all about?" And just being a firefighter, I just said, "Well, I guess I'm going worldwide, boys," not having any idea of the magnitude of that statement at the time. But and then I finally saw it the next morning when I got up. I think the Daily Oklahoman, it was I think it was the inset picture. There was a big picture on the cover of car fires, I think, and then the inset, and then like the USA Today had it, and then one fireman came in at shift change with the Dallas Morning News, and I think it was on there. and we'd flipped on the TV to watch the news coverage of
everywhere.
it. And then like the morning shows when they're showing the headlines from around the world, it was just like captured on every, showing I've got it in all these different languages, that what they're putting on the newspaper. So and again, my first thought was, does that family know that that's their baby? I didn't know, I didn't know anything at the time. Mm-hmm. That was kind of my first thought. I was just like, man, I wonder if that's going to how they're going to find out. Because, we've been watching the news most of the night in the morning. There was people still hadn't been able to locate their loved ones. And they were saying there were people at the morgue or at the ME's office or at the emergency rooms that hadn't been identified. So that was just my thought about, man, is this how this person's going to find out and see their baby on the cover of a newspaper? So
I spoke with Erin, Baylee's mother, the mother of that little girl, and she said that, the day after when she woke up, her family, she said, well, where's the newspaper? And they were like, we didn't get it, but we don't have one. And she was like, well, why wouldn't there be a newspaper? Yeah. Because they had seen that photo and they just knew immediately, and to have her, you have lost your daughter, and then now there's this photo, and it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. That is a big struggle. I mean, that was a hard moment for her. And I would think that you too, seeing that, it's just, and today, I mean, do you still see that photo? And does it bring back a certain feeling?
It does bring back a certain feeling, but now, that, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but I get to go speak to other first responders, and I know that I totally get my platform and my ability to go speak to first responders about mental trauma and stuff because of that day and that photo. Yeah. I mean, it's just the way it is. And, I use the photo, I just show it briefly, and then I show a picture of Baylee also so everybody can see who Baylee really was. And, have Aaron's blessing. Yeah. And so when I see it now, it's not as emotional, or I don't think about the things I thought of, 25 years ago, because it's being used for good. Yeah. And I have Aaron's blessing and all that. And so.
How long was it then until you met Aaron?
Me and her have talked about that. I think it was the next day. I think it was Thursday, the day after. And I remember when I left the station that morning, there was reporters actually outside the fire station already. When I got home, I don't know how they do it, but there was already reporters.
Especially in that time.
Right.
I mean, it's not like you just, looked it up on your Facebook page,
Right. Or, my Twitter or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But, there was reporters at my house and stuff. So I had to call like our PIO at the time, John Hansen. Mm-hmm. What do I do? Yeah. I don't know what to do here. So he helped a lot. He got the police over there but there used to be a local reporter named Cynthia Gunn. Mm-hmm. She called. I had a firefighter kind of hung out with me, a guy named Mike Walker, who he was kind of a newer guy at the station, but kind of a big, imposing figure. So I kind of hung around with him that day. He came to the house and he just kind of answered the door and said, they're not speaking. He was that way. Me and my wife didn't have to answer the door because it was constant. Well, through Chief Hansen, Cynthia Gunn contacted me and said, hey, do you want to meet the mother of the baby? And I said, no. And I said, I wouldn't know what to say. I don't want to. I just said, no, I really don't. I'm not interested. And she said, well, she wants to meet you. And I said, well, then that kind of changes everything. Yeah. So I said, okay. Then she said, okay. And they set up the deal, and we drove to her grandparents' house, I believe. Mm-hmm. And
were you afraid to meet her? What was your thought on that? I mean, why would you be hesitant?
I think because I didn't know what her reaction was. I didn't know how she was gonna. What she want to punch on me a little bit? Did she want to? I mean, I didn't know because I just, like I said, I didn't know how she found out about it. And a lot of people say, and I know as firefighters we're classified in a group as heroes. I've had to correct reporters and say, the heroic photo, and I say, there was nothing heroic about it. She was passed away. I didn't, jump out a second-story window and keep her from hitting the ground and saved her life. I said it wasn't anything like that. I said she was handed to me, And so the hero word was getting thrown around, and it was just, I just didn't know how she was going to, react. And as first responders and firefighters, we pride ourselves on getting somewhere and making a bad situation better. And we didn't get to do that day very much. There were a few instances, but not as much as we like to pride ourselves on. So it was just kind of a nervous, scary feeling, but Erin made it pretty easy.
How did that meeting go? Did she comfort you in that?
I've told that a million times. Yeah, she was a 20-year-old single mom comforting, 10-year firefighter and a 20-something-year-old gruff police officer. Yeah. She was standing there comforting us, because she just thanked us. She was thankful for the way we cared for Baylee, and she was thankful that she knew Baylee's fate already. She said, that's what was pretty impressive, that she said, that she was concerned for the other people that didn't know, waiting to find out. So, yeah, I've always tell people that it was crazy that there was this 20-year-old single mom had just lost her child comforting, two grown men.
Yeah, exactly. So. And, to kind of talk about, I think that's something that firefighters, police officers, just rescue personnel in general struggle with, is people that come up to you and say, well, you're a hero. But in your mind, you're like, yeah, but I didn't save that person, and I say this all the time. One of the hardest things about being a firefighter is you don't get to pick who you save. And it's that person that you want to save the most. They're the ones that usually die.
Right.
And you can't get past all these other people that you save because there's one that you didn't.
There's just that one, right?
And there's always that one. And you talk about when you held Baylee, about in your mind, you kept thinking someone else's world is going to be turned upside down. But that moment, honestly, it turned your world upside down.
Exactly. It was and I tell people that a lot. A lot of people think that, and as we talk about it, April 19th, 1995, the photo and the bombing itself and some things that occurred after the bombing, it was kind of a catalyst to kickstart a lot of other unprocessed trauma that I hadn't dealt with. And so I sometimes I want to tell people, I guess if it wasn't for that time and that day, and I went through the struggles I went through, I don't know where I would be today, really. I mean, I would say I'm the father and the husband I am today because of that, because I don't know.
You needed something to push you over the ledge.
Right, and that did.
For you to get help.
Right. And there's 1,000 different, things, the way people describe it, stuffing things in the closet till it's so full, or trying to hold beach balls underwater. You can only hold so many. And that was just kind of my straw that broke the camel's back, I guess, for a cliche.
Well, let's talk about some of that, because you came from a time, and I think a lot of people struggle with this, with PTSD, is I'm not tough if I can't do this myself. I'm a firefighter. I see all these things. I should be able to handle this myself. No one else knows what I've been through. They can't possibly help me. And that was your life after that.
That is exactly. I was hired in 1985, and I'm getting ready to be 56 years old. So I'm from that era. Suck it up. That's what we did. It didn't matter. Even before I got in the fire department, little league sports. Hey, if you're hurt, you ain't going to play. So you need to get up, dust yourself off, and get back in there. And that's the way it was in the fire service. And not that firefighters don't care, they don't have hearts. But that's just the way we deal with stuff. We use, and they still use today, little dark humor helps us get through it. But we would, I've lost like 4 brothers, I think, in the line of duty, on the job, I think. And, we go to these funerals, and we firefight. We're grown men. We cry and we hug each other, and we tell stories, the war stories about the people, but we don't ever process it and deal with it. And that's just how I was brought up on the fire department, and that's what I did with a lot of the feelings and the emotions I was having after the after the bombing.
What was PTSD like for you after the bombing? What did that look like?
Well, for me, and as we talked off air, we talked about, I felt a lot of guilt for, being the last one to hold Baylee, and for Aaron not being able to grieve privately. Y'all probably know as well as anybody, that she wasn't afforded the same kind of privacy because everybody knew who Baylee was. Everybody knew when her funeral was going to be. Everybody knew when. So, and I think a hard thing for Erin that was that Baylee wasn't remembered as Baylee. Baylee was remembered as the baby in the firefighter's arms. Like Baylee didn't have a name. Baylee was the baby in the firefighter's arms. And I think that was really hard for Erin. And I took a lot of that on. And I think I'm not special. I'm not different. I think any firefighter would have taken it on just like that because that's just our hearts. That's what we do. And, but the way I probably dealt with it was, or didn't deal with it, let me put it that way, was probably my downfall. And it was just, there would be days where I would sit around and, think about that day and think about, Erin and Baylee and her family. And, you always want to second guess. Well, maybe if I would have done this, or maybe if I would have stayed there and helped the paramedic, maybe it would have been different. Or because he was so overwhelmed, and I just left him there. You just start playing all these different scenarios. And some days it would never enter my mind, but some days it would.
And it wouldn't leave.
It wouldn't leave. Some days I was as active and normal as usual. And some days I'd come home from the fire station, get on the couch, and that's where I'd be till about 15 minutes before my wife got home from work. So she wouldn't know I've been laying around on the couch all day, just doing nothing. And but I had a unique skill. I think we all firefighters learn it. That when I went to the fire station, nobody ever knew anything different.
Why do you think that is? I mean, you would almost think that this is where I'm safe because these guys get it. And those are almost the people that you feel like people should be opening up to, but they're not.
No, it's better today than it was 25 years ago. But like I say, it was okay to talk about it, but it wasn't okay to show the emotions, which that's one thing I like to tell people and first responders. These emotions you feel after a traumatic event, man, they are perfectly normal, and people, I felt like a unicorn. I thought, well, I'm the only one feeling this way, because everybody else
looks fine.
Everybody else looks fine, but they were doing, a lot of them, which I've come to find out, were doing just what I was doing. And, I was a station officer, so I didn't want the administration, the guys that put me in that position to think I couldn't handle my job. Yeah. You don't want the guys and girls working underneath you you don't want them thinking you can't handle your job. So it's just a skill you learn to push it down and, I guess survive day to day. Yeah. And that's what I did for how that went on and it really wasn't causing any conflict at home. Talking to my wife now, she could see it, but she knew it was just kind of, job related. She really didn't think, because she didn't really know what was going on, inside of me. Like I said, she'd get home from work, I was up doing stuff. She didn't know I'd been on the couch for the last 6 or 7 hours or in the bed just laying there watching the day go by. And so that was kind of my life until about 2003 or 2002, 2003. I had kind of a trigger, which I didn't know it was a trigger. Then I know what a trigger is now.
Okay, for people that don't, what is a trigger?
The way I describe it, it's just something that takes you back to a traumatic event.
A smell,
I shouldn't even say a traumatic event. It can be something that takes you back to a great event in your life. It just triggers your brain to think about that moment, good or bad.
What is your trigger?
My trigger was a lot of people, it rained the night of the bombing. So we had that smell of wet concrete dust. We were putting a pool in our backyard. I was helping the guys bust out some of my patio, and it started to rain. And I caught a smell of that concrete dust under the patio. And it was kind of damp, like it was inside the building when it started to rain. Kind of, kind of that damp feeling, humid feeling. And I just thought, golly, that smells just like the bombing. I didn't like fall to my knees. I didn't have a major noticeable reaction, but in my mind, I just thought, that smells just like the bombing.
Yeah.
I can pinpoint that as a day that I noticed that I felt that my demeanor was becoming more noticeable. And I didn't tell my wife about the trigger, but when I tell her about when the trigger was, she's not sure about the day and all that, and I'm not either, but she can relate to the time and the year to say that's probably when she noticed I wasn't hiding as much around the house as far as the bad days and the depression and the isolation but I still kept it out of the fire station.
Yeah.
And that went on for a few years.
And I think that's a big thing about PTSD is I don't think people realize what you go through when you're by yourself, when it's at night and everybody else has went to bed, or you're alone, or you have that trigger, or you just have that moment, that memory, and those flashes just keep coming back and not having that ability to go away.
Right. And like I say, and the isolation and the depression and the anxiety and, just thinking back about that day, you always think, is there anything different we could have done? And I was really focused on the bomb. There's some things that went on inside the building that some people don't ever need to hear about or see or, just necessary stuff, but it was just stuff you would think, all right, even as a firefighter, you will never experience this, but to see something you're going, so you're just, I just got to where I wasn't, I became really short-tempered and angered a lot easier. And, zero communication with my wife. It was non-existent. And, so that just led, that was kind of where the tailspin started. And then once she became more involved, once she really noticed it and she started reaching out more to help me, that's when I pushed her away more. And because still I want to be able to handle it, you know, and man of the house.
If I can't handle it, I'm not the man.
Right, I'm not the man of the house.
Yeah.
My job is to take care of my family, and you're not going to think I can take care of my family if I'm struggling mentally. So I think she had even a few close friends on the fire department. She had called them just to check on me, and they were saying, no, we haven't noticed anything at the fire station, and so now she's, putting it together, and without that communication, and one thing I've learned, and I am not a communication expert, a spousal communication expert at all, but I know that I have learned, and I try to pass this on to people, that you got to tell them something, because if she says what's wrong, and I keep saying, they start thinking it's them because I don't want to tell them, and that's one thing I have learned, that the communication is huge, and our lack thereof is probably what led to.
Well, and it's almost being a spouse, you would almost rather hear, I don't want to talk about it, but I'm struggling today.
Right.
It's not you, but I'm processing things, and I just need to process them.
I will tell you, that's what the experts say. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Just be open. And because you telling me those 3 little lines, I go, okay,
right.
That's understandable. I'm going to let you process it. But if you're like, nothing, don't worry about it. And then you're like, well, what is it me? Well, what's going on? What's wrong? How are, and then more questions come.
And that's what they told me. They said, and I've learned it over the years, just, say, you know what, we had a couple tough calls. I need a couple hours just to regroup, and then we can go have lunch or do whatever we do. But I need a couple hours and in our job, we are protectors. We want to protect people, want to make back things better. So the last thing we want to do is come home and tell our family, because we think that's what they want to know. Yeah. When, like you said, basically just say, you know what, I had a couple of tough calls. Let me deal with it. Because in your mind, when she says, well, what was your shift like? And you talk about a traumatic call, then she's going to say, what was it? And you're going to say, it was a car wreck. And then she's going, and you don't want to come home And I probably should have been more that. I think neither one of my sons want to be a firefighter now from the stories I've told, And so, yeah, it was just a total lack of communication. And
Yeah. So what point did you decide, okay, I fake it till I make it and it ain't working? When did you finally break down and not fight it and go, I need help?
how long is this podcast? No, it's it was another 3 or 4 years after that. Me and my wife were separated for 15 months, 17 months. Let me get that right. She corrects me. She went to a speaking deal all the time, and I'm not taking her anymore. She steals the show. Yeah, everybody was.
I bet.
I was up there, and I think I made a comment. I said we were separated. I said, what, 13 months, honey? She said 17. I was like, okay.
There's a few I blocked out of my mind.
Okay, I'm a bigger jerk than I thought. But it came to a point to where it was shape up or ship out, and because I chose my pride and my ego, and more worried about my legacy with the fire department, that I shipped out. And we were separated, like I said, 17 months. And, there was just a lot of stuff that, there was an extramarital affair. There was, started having a doctor that could give me the Xanax when I needed it. And, finally it got to the point to where between mixing Xanax and alcohol together, it really wasn't about the bombing anymore. It wasn't about, and we're talking 17 months later, we're talking a lot of humiliating family and alienating friends and family. The only ones that I really alienated and humiliated were the ones that were reaching out to help me.
Ones that were closest, who really, truly wanted help for you.
I was getting all my advice from, other firefighters that were in the same predicament as me, telling me, hey, man, do what you want to do. Live your life, And so that's the persona I took to the fire station, that, I want to live in this 600 square foot apartment by myself and hardly ever see my sons. And, that was, but it was cool. That's what I thought. This is Chris Fields, and I'm going to keep this image. And it wasn't, like I said, and then it got to where it was more about what I had done to other people at this point. I wasn't even really thinking about the bombing stuff anymore, or other stuff on the fire department, or other traumatic events. It was more about, I have done so much damage that I just didn't think there was any way to repair it.
So this is my new normal.
This is the new normal, and get back to where, and having experience on calls, and this is really how selfish of a person I was. Being on calls and first aid calls, and knowing that people mix things wrong sometimes. And I've made intentional overdoses. I've made accidental overdoses. So I thought, well, if I could get enough Xanax and enough alcohol in me, that there's a chance that I wouldn't wake up. But in my mind, I'm thinking, but everybody would think Chris Fields accidentally. It wasn't something he couldn't handle. He didn't do it intentionally. It was just, that's the kind of.
But that was your thought.
That was my thought. That was where I was in my little world. And, when I woke up the next morning and thought, I'm still here. But I thought, I had a panic attack that morning, about 2:30 or 3 in the morning, to where I woke up and I was looking for my family. And then I don't remember anything until 5:30 or 6. And that's when I woke up. And I thought, once I established that I was still here, I thought, there's no way that this is my purpose. I was laying there in my living room floor at this little apartment and looking up at the lights and the ceiling fan going around, thinking, okay, there's no way this is what my existence is supposed to consist of. I thought, as long as I got a breath in my body, there's no way I think that this is God's purpose for my life. It can't be. At that time, I'm thinking, my purpose is to be a good father, a good husband, and a good friend, which I had pretty much thrown all those three out. And, I called my wife, and I still get emotional talking about it. I was speaking in Arizona, and I had a guy ask me, like you did, kind of, that was the bottom. But he said, at what point did you know you had made the decision and you turned the corner and you knew everything was going to be okay? And it was when when I told my wife I was ready to come home, and she said, "Come on," because I thought, "Wow, that wasn't the answer I was expecting." I was expecting, well, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then you can come home. But she said, "Come home, we'll fix it." And I kind of thought, wow, if she's got that much grace, or God's given her that much grace to forgive me, I said, I think things are going to be okay. And it wasn't all peaches and cream after that. There was, it was a struggle.
It's a rebuilding.
It was a total rebuilding, and but it was funny that all those people that I had alienated and humiliated along the way were waiting there to help me. So that's when I
waiting
said,
for you to come home.
Right. And that's what Cheryl tells a lot of people. A lot of friends said, leave the bum, kick the bum to the curb. And I wouldn't have blamed her. Then again, when I'm thinking that, I'm thinking, but then it wouldn't be Chris Fields' fault.
That's right.
I'm serious. That's the game I played the whole time. That's humiliating to admit, but that's the game I was. If she will divorce me, then I'm not the bad guy here.
But honestly, you saying that, that's clicking with somebody else who's living that exact same thing. Well, this isn't me. This is because of you, and this is you, and this is you. It's not me. And I think that's a big moment for a lot of people to realize this is me.
Right. Yeah. It was.
How do I fix this?
And that's what my wife tells some of her friends. She says, or she'll tell people now, she'll say, I just knew it wasn't Chris. She said, when I looked in his eyes, it was just dark. She said, so I knew it wasn't Chris that I was dealing with.
Yeah.
And so that's why she was as strong as she was. And that's when I kind of, turned the corner, for lack of a better term, and sought out and got the help I needed. And like I said, it wasn't all. There were some days where I just didn't feel like going. Once I went away for treatment, with diagnosed PTSD.
To a place in California, right?
I went to a place in California, and actually went there, and then I went back as a peer counselor, which was a great experience. And
to help somebody else.
Yeah,
I just think,
was cool.
Man,
but
there's no better way to feel that dark void inside of you than when you're helping someone else through what you went through.
I get that feeling when I've been out speaking a few times, and I've gotten. I always put my Twitter and something else so people can contact me, or my email if they want to, and I'll get an email a day later or a direct message on Twitter saying, "Hey, you were number one stepping on my toes. Thank you." And so once I got back from the treatment, and I started seeking counseling here, going to see a lady named Kathy Thomas, and there were still days that I just didn't want to go, and I knew the rules. I knew that Kathy couldn't tell my wife anything. So there were some days and Kathy was in Stillwater, so there were days that I would drive halfway to Stillwater, pull over, and just sit there for a couple hours and turn around and go home and tell my wife that counseling went good. But then I start thinking, okay, the days that you do go for your counseling, man, when you leave there, you're like, I'm stepping a little taller, and it's just a fresher breath of air when I leave there dealing with Kathy. And so that's when I just kind of decided I'd put the full out effort. And I was doing it for, me and my family instead of just to get everybody off my back, and went through some therapy called, EMDR therapy. Do not ask me to describe it. As I know is it worked for me. It's a...
What's it something like there's... after you've experienced something, like when you get into a deep sleep, like your mind then almost sends it over to the other brain in a filing cabinet. This is,
yes.
We're putting this away. But when you have that trauma, it doesn't file.
Right. And the EMDR was a big help and it helps you talk about these traumatic events without experiencing those emotions that you're scared to talk about it because the emotions you feel when you talk about it. Well, this is, and it's not hypnosis. It's not it's just, they stimulate one side of the brain, and you're able to talk about things without having those feelings and those emotions. So, but what's amazing about it for me was that it opened up a whole new can of worms. And that's one of the reasons I think when we first got into EMDR and I had the first session, I was thinking, all right, this is too much. I'm good. I can handle what I got going on, but able to, like I say, it opened up a whole new can of worms of unprocessed trauma that I had experienced and some I had never ever talked about, some I'd talked about but never really truly processed and got through the emotions of it and all that. So it was a huge learning experience.
Yeah. And I really commend you, because what you're doing now is helping so many people, first responders and people who have not dealt with things they need to be dealing with. So how did you transition into, I guess I would say, I don't know, being a leader or being a support, being a guide, guiding people to get that help they need?
It was something I never thought about. And it was, I stayed friends with a guy that I met in California, one of the clinician guys, and he said, he texted me out of the blue one day and said, hey, I got a buddy who tells his story and talks about his trauma, and he leads this group, and he's going to be speaking at an event down in Norman. He said, you ought to go and meet him. I'm going to tell him, if you're going, let me know, and I'll tell him you're coming. So I did. I went and met this guy, and we went to lunch, and we talked about everything, and he said, you know what? He said, only you can tell that story. That's your story. He said, you could help a lot of first responders, because mine was, what I found out was that it wasn't just the bombing. It was a bunch of cumulative trauma. It was childhood trauma. It was, you name it. I had that, I filled in the blanks. And like I say, it was just, they say like 80 something or 90% of people that become first responders, it's usually because of they've experienced childhood trauma. And
really?
Yes, I was reading a deal on it, and it's because they want to become protectors. And this is all this subconscious stuff, I guess, that I don't really understand. Way too deep for me. But anyway, when I left there, I thought, I might do that. Well, another friend of mine called me from Arizona. He had a little event going. He said, hey, you want to come out here and speak at this event for first responders? And he said he was going to tell his story, and he said, I'd love it if you'd come out and just tell your story. And I said, okay. So I got there, and it was just, it was crazy. I got there, and I had left my little notes sitting in the airport where I changed planes. I didn't have anything. So I just got up there and just started speaking, telling my story. And of course, I get emotional just like I have talking to you. And it was, it went what I thought was pretty good. And so it just kind of snowballed from there into getting opportunities to go speak. And now I don't need notes anymore. And I do have a little, I call it a PowerPoint. It's really not a PowerPoint. It's, I know where my platform comes from, and I know if it wasn't for that day in 1995 that I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing. So I show a little brief video from that day, like a news story, and I show a big picture of the 168 victims. I show a picture of Baylee and because I want everybody to see who Baylee is, that she's not just the baby in the firefighter's arms. So I show a picture of her that Aaron gave me. And so everybody thinks, what's your PowerPoint? I said, it's really not a PowerPoint. It's not like an outline and stuff you're going to go, and write stuff down, and it's just, I feel like I should honor those people because that's where I get my platform. And then I talk about some people that inspire me. There's a mentor guy I like to follow named Jay Dobbins, who speaks a bunch, and he's always told me, he said, look to other people for inspiration. So that's what I do. If I'm ever having one of those, woe is me, feel sorry for Chris Fields Day, I think about these other people and what they've gone through and where they're at. Aaron, the fact that she's still, thriving is a miracle. And, there was other people like Amy Downs, from the bombing, who, I don't know if you know her story. It's crazy. But, just some of the people that have come out of that and are using that now to go help other people. And so I just show some of their pictures and stuff like that. And then my family, of course. I show family pictures. I had a guy say, hey, I missed your presentation. Can you send me your PowerPoint? I was like,
let me show you my family photo.
Yeah, because that's what it was. I said, well, it's pictures of my family and people that I honor because that's the reason I'm where I'm at today. So that's what I do. And I still have days where, I think, look what all I went through. I still think sometimes about what I put my family through, and kind of start the old woe is me deal. And but then I just think about where I'm at today in my marriage and with my relationship with my sons, and just think that, and that was a big thing for me, learning what my family went through. When you're trying to get help for yourself, you're focused on yourself. You're focused on Chris Fields.
Yeah.
And then when I went to an event, I was speaking, and this lady spoke before me, and she was a wife of a sheriff in some state, I can't remember, but she went through, her story was just the effects on the family of PTSD and all that. And when I heard that, I thought, and I've been speaking for a year, probably at that time. Never had I sat there and thought about what I put my family through.
And then you're like, man, I got to get up here and talk now. And now I'm just like pieces.
I went out there and I called my wife and I apologized. She goes, wait. I said, I've been forgiven, and I knew she knew. I said, but I don't know if I ever really apologized for what I put them through. I mean, when I heard this lady's story, I was like, wow, I was a piece of crap.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you hear these stories, and so, like I said, I'm blessed today to get to do what I do,
and what organization you kind of travel for? Who are you doing that with, or is it just people that are calling you and having you do
myself?
that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I really don't. I am. There was a group called Eagles Rise Speakers Group. It's just I'm a part of them. If they get stuff, I mean, I don't have to go through them, but they call me sometimes, say, hey, this group's looking for. But it's made up of, their group's amazing. It's like, okay, do I really need to be on this list? I mean, it's like,
well, you are amazing.
But it's like Navy SEALs that have been shot in the face, that have lived, and they tell their story and all this. And I'm going, okay. But so, other than that, it's just by word of mouth, or that guy I mentioned, Jay Dobbins. He'll tell a lot of people, like if they call him about speaking at something and he can't, or something, he'll say, hey, he'll email and introduce us through email and stuff like that. And so just
well, I think you have an amazing story to tell, and I really love that you're using something that was tragic. I mean, that tore your life apart, to build up other people's lives, to help people who are stuck in that just dark area, to go, hey, come this way, there's light. Right. There's light over here, and I'm going to help you find it, because I don't think you realize how many lives that you save simply by telling your story. And that's just, to me, it's one of those hard things, because I can see that emotion, that that's still there, but you're choosing to tell it to help other people heal. And I just, that's an amazing thing.
I appreciate that. I really do. And
so I want to wrap with this. And if you can describe it in a word, or if you can use a few words if you need to, what is it really like to be a first responder from the Oklahoma City bombing?
Ooh, golly, I've never been asked that. I can say it now. To me, it was actually, I take pride in saying I was a first responder in the Oklahoma City bombing. So, because like I said, and I'm gonna go into a few words. It was an honor to be a part of that response, and not just from the first responders. I get emotional when I talk about the way the city responded and the state. I mean, it was just an event I would never wish on anybody. But as a first responder, to get to do what we do and do what we did that day, I know we made some lives better, or made the situation better for some, as a group, as a fire department. So I would just say, it's kind of an honor to be a part of that group responded that day.
Your history,
and not just that day. The I don't want to say just that day, because it went on for a month. So for everybody, that was down there, it was just it was an honor.
Thank you very much.